The conversation that we are having today is the fruit of a work of three friends, myself, Alessandro Giudici, and Lorenzo Rossi. We are professionals based in London with 15 years of work experience, trained respectively in economics, business, and finance. We are experts in our fields. We go to conferences. We read the latest research. We even write research. But whenever we heard Pope Francis talking about the economy, we heard something different from what is usually discussed in our circles. We heard a radical call to change the economy, a call for a personal change, the change to behave like the Good Samaritan. We wanted to understand better, so we did our own research. We engaged in dialogues with other experts, but not many were able or capable to say something about this apparently basic and fundamental topic. But through this journey, we met John Bird here with us today, and he was able to say something about this topic, and he was interested on the topic of the Good Samaritan. So it's not really possible to summarize all the things that John has lived and has done. So I'm not going to do this, and he will be the one telling us about his own life. But talking about reggae last night, and that's one of the effects, and that's one of the effects that they use, the dub. But going back to our topic, for most of the people, John is famous to be the founder of The Big Issue. We all know about The Big Issue. It's a magazine that is sold by homeless street vendors, started in London in 1991. But maybe not many of us know that it is edited by professional journalists. And nowadays, the same model of The Big Issue exists in 35 different countries in 25 languages. So, John, is it really true that even one Good Samaritan can change the economy and therefore change the society? What does it mean in your experience to behave like a Good Samaritan?
I always stand up largely because I'm a public speaker who learned to be a public speaker when I was a Marxist, Engelist, Leninist, Trotskyist, trying to destroy capitalism. I should have left it to Wall Street, because Wall Street's pretty good at destroying capitalism, which they keep doing and reinventing to refine capitalism. I don't know if I can answer that question. Can I answer another question? Why am I here? No. You know, the parable of the Good Samaritan is a brilliant parable, largely because as a child growing up as a London Irish Catholic, it was very difficult in the slums of Notting Hill, where many of the people around me were racist. They were racist against the Irish, and they were racist or chauvinistic against Catholics. So we were very much a kind of minority. But also the people I grew up with were violent, wife beaters, drunks, didn't pay the rent, criminal, and all that sort of stuff. And what was interesting for me was, and this makes me very weird and very perverse, and I'm sorry about this, but from a very early age, I knew that Jesus was there for me, because there were no adults there for me. My parents would drink and smoke. We were homeless. We were in and out of trouble with the police. We were sent to court. We ended up in an orphanage and all sorts of stuff like that. But Jesus was a kind of wise geezer. And there was nobody else who was wise, because all the adults were idiots. They really were. They were the proletariat. They were the broken of the poorest of the poor. And I never saw the elegance of poverty, and I never saw the noble poor when I was a boy. I only saw people who hurt each other and hurt me and hurt their women and their children. The idea of a good Samaritan, I have tried when I was in the prison system, because I wasn't a prison officer, by the way. I was an inmate. I went in there and they kept me there. And I would always meet the weak, and they would be trodden on. And I would do my best to protect the weak. And often I would get beaten up myself. So there was something in me that was weird, that was not like the dishonest and the disloyal people I came from. My brothers, for instance, had no time for any goodness, and I pursued goodness. But I was a good Catholic, but also a good shoplifter. I was a good Catholic, but I was also a good housebreaker. I was a good Catholic and a great dauber of swastikas on the walls of houses after the Second World War, because the lowest of the low loved putting up swastikas and pissing off and annoying the middle classes. And the thing about Notting Hill is it was very, very poor, but it was surrounded by plenty. So we could go and pull down their fences and hack down their trees and daub swastikas on their doors. So to me, I have a personal commitment to the Good Samaritan, because I think it was what made me want to do something that was useful. And it actually took me 45 years going through Marxism and going through racism and being an anti-Semite and being an against black people and Indians and Arabs and all that, and then becoming a Marxist and getting rid of all that stuff, and then in the end getting rid of my Marxism. You see, I'm finishing the lecture very quickly here, because we can go after this. Anyway, when I was 45, I met a guy who I'd met when I was 21, hiding from the police in Edinburgh, because I used to spend a lot of my time hiding from the police. They were always looking for me because they wanted to lock me up for things that I'd done wrong. I hid from them for about 7 years. And I met this guy who I knew when I was 21, and he had no money. Met him 20 years later, and he had morphed into a multi-millionaire. And I rang him up. I saw him on the television. I rang him up. Is this all right? Yes. Is this all right? Is this all right for you lot? Yeah, sorry. Oh. I will be telling a few jokes, by the way. Anyway, so I rang him up, and he said, "Are you that John Bird from Edinburgh?" That's where he knew me from. And I said, "Yes." He said, "Are you one of those persons who climbs out of the woodwork when someone makes money?" And I said, "Yes." He said, "Well, you better come and see me." He knew exactly what I wanted from him: money. Because I had all these ambitions for changing the world. He went to New York, this man, and he was walking through the streets of Manhattan, and a very large black guy, he said he looked like a wardrobe, came towards him. And Gordon went, "Oh, God, what's going to happen here?" And the guy said, "Excuse me, sir, would you like to buy a copy of my street paper?" And Gordon said, "Yeah, how much is it?" He says, "It's $1." He said, "How does it work?" He said, "Well, I buy it for 50 cents, I sell it for $1. Why are you doing it?" He says, "Well, I'm 54. I've been in and out of the penitentiary all my life. And if I go in again, they're going to throw the key away. And I will never see my children, and I'll never be able to help them. So I'm now living in a rooming house in Queens, and I'm sending money to my daughters who won't even come and see me because I'm an arsehole. Excuse, that's a technical term. I'm an arsehole. That's another one. Sorry, excuse me, there's a young boy there, please. And I don't... I want to help my children. So anyway, Gordon thought this was brilliant. Came back to London. He started a body shop with his wife, Anita Roddick, who's a good Italian girl. And they looked around for somebody to start a street paper in London because there were thousands of homeless people sleeping in the streets of London. And they asked all of the regular homeless organizations, all of the nice, respectable people, as the Holy Father refers to, respectable. They were worried about ever looking as though they had a hole in their pants, so to speak, or whether they'd ever trodden on any shit. They were worried. They were always worried about their reputation. And none of them would take it to do a street paper. They said, why would you do a street paper? To give homeless people the opportunity of making money, because we know what they're going to do with it. Drinks, or put it in their arms, or up their noses, or wherever else you put your drugs these days. I don't keep up with it. And they were saying, don't do it. Gordon said to me, look, you're an ex-homeless person. You've slept rough on the streets. You've been in and out of prison. You are actually an arsehole. And you have no sentimental attachment to the poor. All you want to do is to turn the poor into something else. You don't want to enshrine them in their poverty by giving them social security so that they're stuck and they never go anywhere. Give them social housing so that only 2% of their children ever finish their school leaving certificate, ever get into the university, ever export themselves from poverty, ever do anything that transforms them from poverty into a life of enrichment. So Gordon knew all this about me, and he knew I'd been a Marxist, Engelist, Leninist, Trotskyist, and he knew that I'd got rid of them because they were all utopian. When the revolution comes, we will be able to straighten everything out, which was bollocks. And I got rid of them. At 45, suddenly, I was given the chance of being a useful Samaritan. I was given the chance. And when the homeless organizations formed a configuration around me at a conference and said, who the hell are you? You haven't been to the university to study social inadequacies and social statistics. You've never even volunteered for shelter and all the crises at Christmas. You've never done any of these things. You're just a second-hand car dealer. I did have some very nice Volvos at the time, but you know, I got rid of most of them. So I stood up there. It was about 150 of all the big players in homelessness. And, oh, by the way, you must realize I have delusions of grandeur. It's kind of Napoleonic complex. I'm a bit too tall to be a true Napoleon. But I do believe that I'm here for purpose. So forgive me if I sound as though I'm trying to recruit you to the John Bird army of social dislocation. Anyway, so I stood up to them and I said, wouldn't it be wonderful if for once, I started so softly, wouldn't it be wonderful if for once, just once, only once, that somebody who had actually been homeless was given the chance are working to rid people of their homelessness. Wouldn't it be wonderful? Rather than having a degree in it or a conscience. Oh, the amount of people who cry over the poor. I'm surprised they haven't drowned the poor by now. They cry over it. Oh, it's fucking terrible. It's a fucking earth. Oh, hello there. What's on television tonight? I wanted to be effective. I screwed them all. They never touched me. They hated me. They loathed me. I was working class. And they were middle class. I was a person who had been a beggar, a liar, a cheat, a thief, a prostitute. I was a male prostitute, but I was very selective. I never did anything with men. It had to be women. And I did help people when I was 15 and 16. Young girls, young women, older women. So I'd done all of the terrible things that you have to do if you're sleeping on the streets and you're rough and all that stuff. At 45, I could begin to create an organization that would be a permanent fixture on the streets of London and the other cities of the UK, and then France, and then Germany, and then Russia, and then Poland, and then Taiwan, and then China, Japan, and then North America and South America. We spent thousands of pounds building up an international link, showing that if you gave the homeless the chance of making their own money, you decriminalized them. And if they did that and that, they weren't robbing old ladies to do it. We created an effective way of demonstrating what the Holy Father talks about. That's my answer. I'm going home now. Thank you very much indeed. I'm a very religious person, so I've got some plates and I want to pass them around so maybe you can put some money in. I'm joking. Oh, yeah, God.
There is something that you said that really struck my attention. You said, I was given the chance to be a good Samaritan. Someone gave you the chance. But let's go a bit deeper in another concept that you used, the middle class. So, I mean, of course, we had few conversations between the four of us. And you told us that you are very fond of a poem by the latest, greatest, Pier Paolo Pasolini. The poem actually is not very well known to many, I would say. It is The Desire for Wealth of the Roman Lumpen Proletariat, il desiderio di ricchezza del subproletariato romano. Just few verses from it. They long for money like gypsies, mercenaries, whores. They complain if they don't get it, using gross flattery to get it. And then, their desire for wealth is at once bandit-like and aristocratic, like mine. Everybody thinks of himself, of winning the anguished bet, of telling himself we made it with a royal sneer. Our hopes are equally obsessive, aesthetic in me, anarchic in them. So Pasolini draws a parallel between his life as a middle-class intellectual and the poorest of the poor of Rome. Now, most of us, are common people, we could say middle-class people. Lots of us are married, we have children. We have primary needs that we satisfy. We need to pay the rent. We need to pay mortgages. We need to pay bills. But then we also pay for holidays, for planes, sometimes even for expensive schools. A friend of mine has 10 children. Basically, for him, the struggle is really to get to the end of the month, to be able to afford the holidays every summer. Another couple that I know run the homeless charity that I told you about. Basically, they give all their time to this kind of work. I mean, they need to pay for babysitters in order to be able to do the charity work every week. So all of us do a lot. All of us struggle a lot. And still this call of the Pope about behaving like a good Samaritan. In your opinion, what do we need to do as common middle class people to behave like the good Samaritan?
Well, I think the first thing I recommend my middle class friends, I have to tell you a very interesting story. Sorry about this. I was asked by a TV program. It was called The Psychiatrist's Chair. And it was a doctor, Anthony Clare, who used to ask people, there was an hour program, and he would ask people about their lives, and then there would be a TV break for advertisements. And then he would ask them really horrible questions, which in a sense would dismantle the kindnesses of the first part of the program. And the second part was really excoriating. And I watched two of these, and he had the leader of the Labour Party at the time, Neil Kinnock, really in tears, because he said, he's an Irishman, and he said, Mr. Kinnock, he said, I'm so glad you told us about your wonderful life. And all that. He said, but why do they call you the Welsh windbag? Why do they say that you talk too much and you say very little? And so he was reduced. In his Welsh accent, I didn't. People believe in me and all that. And he ended up crying on television. And then the next one I saw was a very right-wing sort of person who was in the government of Margaret Thatcher and all that stuff. And in the second half, said, oh, Mr. Redwood, sorry, excuse me. Mr. Redwood, they say that you have something about the night about you. You're dark, you're mercurial, you're a bit of a devil. And he went nuts. So then, I hope you're enjoying the story, because I'm almost there. And then I was going on the program. So he said, oh, now, John Bird, here you are in the first part of the program. Oh, John Bird, he said, you're from the working classes, and you're, you come from absolute poverty and crime, and you were in and out of prison and all that sort of things, and you were a male prostitute and everything. And big Jesus, I mean, what a terrible life. And I explained it all. And then the break. And then he came on and he said, John, but come on. Let's be honest. You used to be working class, but you're now middle class. Come on, you're middle class. You're a middle class Englishman. Sorry, I'm using my voice very wrongly. Excuse me. I am 79, and as you can see, I'm perfectly formed. The only thing going wrong is the voice. So if any of you have got any voice elocutions that will help me. So the rain in Spain goes mainly down the drain. Anyway, he said, John, but you're not working class anymore. I mean, you're middle class. You look just like the rest of the English. And he stopped, And I stopped, and he looked at me, and he was waiting for an answer. I said, yes, you're right. I'm middle class. I got out of the working class as soon as I could, because the part of the working class I came from was evil. They beat their children, they beat their wives, they beat their pets. That was my experience. I didn't know the noble working class of some other part. He was completely screwed. And when we were after the program went like a very wet fart. And as we walked back to the green room, he said, you know, John, I've never, ever got a middle-class person in England to admit they're middle class, because they're so guilt-ridden. They're so worried about people seeing them as having privilege and all that. And I said to him, and this is coming back to this, if you want to be useful in your middle class, first of all, get rid of your guilt. Guilt is murder. Guilt destroys you. You know? German guilt after the Second World War didn't get rid of the echoes of Nazism and fascism. And as we're seeing now, there's a recurrence of some stuff. Guilt doesn't get you anywhere. Guilt will not repair what Ireland had to go through because of the fact that England had its foot on its throat. Guilt won't get you anywhere. Guilt is the most evil and pernicious feeling. And I always say to people, guilt will make you do things which you think are good. Guilt will make you take money out of your pocket and give it to somebody on the streets and then walk on and think that you've made some achievement. What you've achieved is you have given somebody a reason to come back tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after, and the day after, and the day after, until they die on average about 15 years before anybody else of their own age. Guilt stops you from being a Samaritan, because the Samaritan that the Holy Father talks about is someone who looks at another human being and sees him as an equal, not someone that you can, in a sense, assuage your own guilt and feeling of, oh, I go home and I look in my cupboard and there's 15 different kinds of cornflakes, or there's 25 kinds of soup I can take out of a can, or I spend more on getting an Uber to the airport than somebody lives on for a week. That thing is poisonous. It divides us. And until we philosophically, intellectually, culturally, socially attack guilt, we're going nowhere. This university, this great university, is full of Philistines. It's Philistinic. It infantilizes the students, because what it does is it tries to pass the guilt from one generation to another. It's not this university, everybody, all colleges and schools are trying to make people feel guilty. Oh, it's all right for you. So if we want to be a good Samaritan, get rid of the guilt and be objective, be thoughtful, be kind. Think of two things at the same time. One, that this person needs help, and you have to be efficient and effective. In the same way as a doctor, if a doctor sees somebody lying there in the blood, they don't bend over and say, oh my, no, it's fucking terrible. You imagine going into the A&E and the nurse runs up to you and says, oh no, look at you, you got your ear hanging off and you got your foot hanging off. You wouldn't want that kind of sentimental attachment. And you don't want guilt. What you need is a searing, efficient look at your resources. What are your resources? Time, as you were describing, is at a premium for most people, including me. I've got 5 children. And I've got 2 very young children, an 18-year-old and a 20-year-old, and they're flying the nest, or almost flying the nest. So I'm always taking them places and doing things with them and running around like a blue-ass fly and all that sort of stuff. Time. Look at your time. What can you do with that time? Be efficient. Do an audit. Do a social audit of who you are and what you've got and what you can use. And if you're helping the Trestle Trust with the food banks, also ask them, what are they going to do about preventing people needing the food bank? I volunteered for the House of Lords. When I say I volunteered, anybody over the age of 23 can apply to be a people's peer, and I'm a people's peer. And I applied to I volunteered because I realized that it was really necessary to have somebody in the House of Lords who was not there to make the poor a bit more comfortable, which is the obsession of capitalism and the obsession of most thinking. Oh yes, let's give the poor more. I had an argument with somebody who works with me. In the big issue, I have a lot of left-wing, medium, woke, kind of very nice people. And she says to me the other day, as we sat in the House of Lords planning our work, she says, John, you should get behind the campaign to stop the 2-child limit. If you've got 3 children, you don't get support from Social Security, because that will lift 700,000 children out of poverty. And I said, I hope I'm allowed to use this word bollocks, am I? Yeah, all right. So I said, bollocks. It's not going to lift 700,000 people out of poverty. What it's going to do is feed people for a while, as long as people are given Social Security. But the world is changing, and there's a distinct possibility, this was a few weeks before the government's cuts, there's a distinct possibility that the Social Security bill will be forced down because of events in world geopolitics, wars and stuff like that, making Britain a defensive force again. So you're not going to get rid of them out of poverty. What you're going to do is make them a bit more comfortable in poverty. And I said, look, the reason that you are thinking this is because you've never lived through poverty. And I have lived through poverty. And I, in a sense, and this is a rude thing, I used to do this, I don't do it now at 79, I would lay on the floor about this time, and I would pretend I'm looking up the skirts of society. And whatever. I'm laying there, so imagine me laying there going, I see society and poverty from below. I have to work at it because I'm not in poverty. But having been through poverty and seeing the corruption of thinking and education, that all they really want to do is make the poor a bit more comfortable. And I've been through the Che Guevara and the Castro and all the other stuff. All of the well-appointed and thoughtful and kindly and loving people who in the end make sure that they're all right, but the poor are stuck. So I've done the ideological trip. But the thing is, getting rid of guilt, getting rid of all these things, and creating a new, searing, honest, admitting that you largely probably know very little, and you don't have the answers. Let's go on a trip finding the answers. And I know some of the answers, but only some of them. I hope I answered that question. Thank you.
I have a last one, but I'm sure, yeah, and I'm sure, and I'm sure that your answer will be very short anyway, and then we'll have few questions from the audience. But I mean, you have mentioned politics, you have mentioned ideologies, you have mentioned an intellectual journey. Actually, you know, I said that I didn't want to say much about your life, but since you didn't mention the kind of position that you got in the House of Lords in 2015, I will be the one mentioning it. So first in 1995, you became MBE because of services to homelessness through Big Issue. And then in 2015, you became a member of the House of Lords as an independent. And I discovered that becoming a member of the House of Lords, as I understand, you became Baron on Notting Hill.
Baron.
Of Notting Hill.
Lord Bird of Notting Hill.
After.
And if you want to write to me, you have to write to Notters.
But this happened after having been a homeless boy at the age of 5 in Notting Hill. So this is clearly something impossible, right? That an homeless boy becomes the Lord Baron of Notting Hill many years after. So clearly there is a desire to make the impossible possible, and that's also the role of politics, that is the role of institutions. So many of us are a bit like you in that respect. We are interested in politics. We are not afraid of risking with politics. We have supported parties, organizations. So in your opinion, where are the good ideas nowadays? What is needed that politics and the engagement in civil society could offer?
Well, I don't like those kind of questions because it means I have to pretend I know more than I do. So if I pretend I know more, will you just shoot me down? I should explain, in 1991, I started the Big Issue. It was an emergency manifestation. It was going in and decriminalizing the poor so that if they were robbing old ladies to get their drink and drugs, I would give them a legal means of doing that so they didn't have to do it. After 10 years, I was asked by the Sunday Times, a journalist, she said, look, John Bird, for the last 10 years, you've been doing the Big Issue. What are you going to do for the next 10 or 20 years? And I said, well, for the last 10 years, I've been mending broken clocks. And for the next 10 or 20 years, I'm going to try and prevent the clocks breaking. Now, where did that come from? I didn't even think it. It just kind of, oh, boom. And a few years after that, I began to realize that everybody was saying, and I was an incredibly popular person, handsome and, you know, Brad Pittish like, going to all the West End clubs and dancing through the night. I was a media, you know, they love me. You know, rough boy, yeah, oh, blah. And I realized it was all bullshit. It wasn't getting me anywhere. So I gave up drinking, I gave up smoking, I gave up pursuing sexual encounters. I was separated from my second wife, who got rid of me because she said I was the noisiest, loudest, opinionated person that she'd ever met. And she never wanted to see me again. She wanted more cats. So now she's got 3 cats, and I'm happy. Anyway, I realized that I was falling for the bull. And I thought, no, I've got to do something. And I realized when people said, Johnny Bird, you know how to think outside the box. Because I thought, hang on. And it always happens in the middle of the night. I wake up and I think, the reason they're saying Johnny Bird knows how to think outside the box is because the box isn't working. So Johnny Bird, get into the box. And how do you do it? David Cameron offered me a lordship, and I went, I'm not a Tory. Nobody offered me a lordship on the other thing. People were serenading me to stand for the mayor of London. I didn't want to have a political party telling me what to think. And then I heard about this thing called People's Peer, invented by Tony Blair, anybody over the age of 23. So I applied for that. It took about 3 years. And eventually, they accepted me. And I went in, and as I explained, and I love doing this because I'm a bit of a show-off, the BBC made a film about my first year in the House of Lords with me and another inheritance peer, you know, what's it called? A hereditary peer. So they had him and me. He was a real prick. I mean, God, he made me look good. Oh, I was brilliant. Always said the apposite. Anyway, this woman who interviewed me said, so why did you go into the House of Lords? And I went, and I pulled out an imaginary knife. I walked up to her. Can somebody stand up? Can you stand up? Now, he's a handsome young lady who works for the BBC. Just imagine that. But she didn't have a beard. So I walked up and I went into the House of Lords to slit the throat of poverty. And she went, oh, you can sit down now. It was a beautiful piece of film, but they wouldn't have it because it looked so real. I went into the House of Lords to slit the throat of poverty, not to make the poor more comfortable, not to hold the hands of the poor. When I went into Parliament, hundreds of MPs and lords who knew me and knew of my reputation came up and said, John, you know, we're very involved in our area, our constituency with, you know, a food bank or whatever. Could you come along and cut a ribbon or whatever? And I said, look, you get on with the stopgaps. You get on with the emergency. You get on with the crisis. And I'll step back here and try and take an overview as to how we dismantle poverty. The first thing is we have to realize that whatever we've done, it hasn't worked. The invention of the welfare state hit the fences and fell over. Countless initiatives by government of all persuasions. So I stood back and I put a few bills through the House, and a couple of them worked. And I came up with this idea, and I've been banging away at it. And I'm only really talking about what everybody in this room should do, apart from putting your hand in your pocket and sending me £100 each, which I will spend wisely. I do have a little holiday home in the south of France. No, what I want, and I tell people, I want them to get behind the idea that we end the tyranny of incompetence, that every government, irrespective of its political color, makes the same mistake. 8 different government departments responsible for some aspect of poverty. Where is the convergence? Where is the coordination? If you have a Ministry of Defense, we know what it's there for. It's to stop people killing us. It's to stop, well, often it's giving you the power to go somewhere else and kill someone else. But we won't go into that. But you know what it's about. So I've been advocating for a Minister of Poverty Prevention and Cure. Because virtually all of the social money that we spent is spent on helping people cope with poverty, not prevent them getting into poverty or giving them the cure. And that's where we are. And that's why the government comes along and slashes the budget, because that enormous amount of money, that is about the amount of money that is spent on prevention of poverty. That is about amount of money that is spent. I can send you a copy of my paper on this, my article. That's about the amount of money they spend on the emergency. And this is the amount of money they spend on coping, warehousing the poor. So I want people to rattle their cage, to get involved politically with whatever political party they're members of, whether they are local councillors and all that, whether they are whatever, and agitate for a convergence of energy around dismantling poverty. And look at all the wonderful things, all the wonderful examples in the world. And do that. Lula, I mean, whether you like Lula or not at this administration, but in his previous administration, he brought in something called family allowance. And it was for the people in the barrios. 38 million people received $112 a month with 2 strings attached. One of them, the mother, because they gave the money to the mother very cleverly, the mother had to go to the doctor every 2 months, because if mother falls ill, then the children go feral, and the police officers who at night pull down their woolly hats go out and kill them for breaking into shops and offices. So mum has to be looked after. And the second one, the children have to go to school. This helped millions of people to move from feral poverty, which is you get up in the morning and you don't know how you're going to feed your children. What are you going to do? You're going to go around looking for cans, Coke cans, or am I going to put one of my children into a sweatshop, or am I going to sell my body? That's feral poverty. Exploitative poverty, see, which a lot of people hate, especially in the West. Oh, exploitative poverty. I tell you what $4 a day does. It gives you stability, and it may give you the chance of moving on. It's a skill enhancement thing. So many times when I've spoken to students about, and other people about, exploitative poverty, I said, look, if you've passed from feral poverty where you don't know how to feed your children, and you're in exploitative poverty, what happens is often your children go to school. Lula did this, lifted millions of people. Unfortunately, every now and then somebody would go into, is this relevant? Is this all right? Are we all right with this? Yeah, I've got a joke. I will tell you afterwards. Millions of people were doing this. But every now and then, in fact, thousands of thugs went into school, pulled out a gun, pointed it at the teacher and said, fill in my children's schooling, whether they go to school or not. And then all the middle-class papers, all the glitter, oh, it's terrible. I know about someone who... It happens thousands. But millions of people were helped. Millions. I was speaking at a conference in Glasgow, and I was set upon by these Brazilian Portuguese people shouting at me, how dare I defend Lula's a family alliance thing. And when I said to them, look, more people were lifted out of it than were corrupted by it. You create an open system and it will be corrupted. People will use it. Anyway, I don't even know what I'm talking about now. So, shall I tell a joke? Right, and then you can ask questions. Was there anything I've missed? Just tell me very quick. No, all right. The joke. Somebody rushes into a shop and he says to the manager, Manager, where are your camouflage jackets? And the manager says, they're good, aren't they? That is one of the most philosophically pure jokes. I love it because you got to think about it. Anyway, I'm really glad to be invited. I'm really pleased to be here. I'm in Parliament. If you want to get hold of me, my email, I think you've got it, haven't you? You could, and we meet with people and we try and be useful. If you really do want to do something, I would suggest you do that social audit of what you're doing, what your resources are. But I would also try and look at the work that we're doing in the big issue and the work that we're trying to, that I'm trying to do in Parliament to build this Ministry of Poverty Prevention. And no political party really likes it because they want to do things the way they've always done it. Thank you.
We still have a few minutes, so let's just ask the audience if they have any quick question. Let's collect a maximum of 3 questions, and then you will decide what to answer and how.
And I will be very quick.
First.
Okay, thank you for speaking, John. I think if I can briefly say, just in my own struggles with sort of how to befriend and I think come alongside those in poverty. I guess my question is about freedom and respecting another's human agency. So I appreciate, I think all of us do, that you don't try to affiliate with a particular party or a right wing or left wing. But I think for me the difficulty has been, how do we come alongside and I think befriend someone and in a way respect their freedom so that you're not pushing your policies and your solutions. I've had great mentors, I think, dealing with mental health or those in poverty who say, even I think someone, let's say on the left-wing side, who said, you know, at some point they have to decide for themselves, right? And this sort of rhetoric. So I'm just wondering, in your position, I think it's very good to be trying to prevent poverty, to help people, but at what point do you come alongside and respect their own decision, their own freedom, instead of, let's say, pushing policies on them? And just very briefly, I think, you know, one could interpret the Good Samaritan parable to say the Samaritan only took care of the man who was and he took care of the immediate needs, but he didn't think about, you know, let's prevent highway robbery from happening again, right? It's just, I trust that the Lord will take care of him the next day, but I'm going to provide for him today. So how do you kind of think about this tension?
Could we have questions that start with what do you think? That was a rambling. I'm not quite sure of what you like, but I try and have a stretch. And again,
Thank you for your contribution. The title of this conversation is Everyday Life to Transform the Economy, but economies change. So how have your efforts and how has the big issue evolved over time? And how to address the evolution of poverty, because poverty has evolved over time, has changed, right? I look at the streets when I pass by and I see homeless people with iPhones. That clearly is not the same poverty that they were experiencing 50 years ago. So my question, very direct to you, and I like you because you're very direct yourself. What do you think of how poverty has evolved, and how has the effort of big issue and your effort personally changed and evolved over time, and what drives you. Because you have walked us through your story and your experience, but I was not able to understand what are the drivers of you internally. I was able to tell the results they wanted to get to, but I was not able to understand your personal drivers inside.
So I guess my simple question, just to follow on, John, would be, what, in your opinion, do we need to do to slit the throat of poverty? That's my simple question. And then a bit more content. So I'm a teacher, and in my opinion, the big poverty that I see every day is a human poverty. Just give you a simple example. There are thousands and thousands, you probably know this, of young women in this country who are making a fortune selling their bodies on OnlyFans. They're not poor. They're not poor in the slightest. Economically, humanly, they're... Oh, yeah. That's an extreme example, but that's a poverty as great and damaging humanly as somebody who's growing up in extreme economic poverty. So my question would be, what is the real, where do you see, where would you put your energy? What would you say to us in the room, to a young person considering, how can I make an impact in my life at this level? What would you say is the key thing?
Very last one from Alessandro at the front.
No, it's fine.
Brief, please.
You told us about your journey, started from a particular take on Catholicism, and then you told us yesterday how you came back all circle to another particular take on the church. So what do you think? What is your journey?
Sorry. I also, when I was 14, I was in a boys'
Yeah, so I said,
Sorry,
yeah,
when I was 14, I was in a boys' prison, and a police officer went bang, and he screwed my ears up.
so
I found it very difficult to hear from the last.
So you told us about how you started your life in coming from a particular family and particular take on the church. And then yesterday you were telling us about how you, after you became a Marxist, etc., 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 you somehow come back to another particular approach to the role of religion in your life. So I would like to understand how that journey somehow, unfolded over time.
Very last one from Giselle.
Yeah, that's why I want to comment. It's more of a comment rather than a question. I'm Brazilian. For your you were unlucky today. So your comment on Lula, I think it's not spot on. I don't agree with you. However, what I want to say is that the difference between what Lula did in Brazil with what you did here, which was you changed. He didn't. So, and I think, is this the essence is to change. If you went through all that you've been through and you managed to change, I think that is the essence, is to realize at a certain point that you need to do something in yourself first before you do to others. So thank you very much. I loved your talk.
Sorry, can I answer that one first?
Yeah.
I'd like to answer that one first. You were talking about change. I don't believe you change yourself first. I think you were changed by doing things. When my sister-in-law lost my brother, who died very young, she said to me, what am I going to do? I've lost the most important thing in my life. I said, go and help someone else. So she didn't change in herself. She went and helped other people who had been stroke victims, and she changed. Lula, if you analyze Lula, you may come to the conclusion he's a corrupt person who did all sorts of things and put money in his back pocket and all sorts of things. Yeah. I'm saying you do that. The thing about our leadership in the world is we can judge them and dismiss them and call them corrupt, which is what the ladies had said to me at that conference in Glasgow. But actually, I know, because we have papers in Brazil, in Sao Paulo, in Rio, I think they're called Faro or something like that, Lighthouse. Anyway, Medellin, or no, that's somewhere else. So we work in, and we have met people who have used that social security that they were given to get out of poverty. And according to the UN, whatever it is, there were 38 million people who received that money, and millions of them. So you can actually have a very corrupt person doing good. You can have Trump actually at some stage, I have no evidence yet, of actually doing some good. You can have Winston Churchill, who's not my favorite person for what he did to the Irish, doing some good, creating the precursor of the welfare state. You can have, if you are a moralist, then what you do is you go around and say, oh, you are not all clean, so I'm not going to work with you. I work with the most despicable people. And I remember when I was starting the big issue, I remember what Mother Teresa said. Give me your dirty money. The dirtier, the better. The Holy Father is quoting her. She sat down with some of the biggest scumbags and pieces of shite in the world. And she brought about social transformation for some of the poorest. So I avoid moralists. Nearly all the moralists, with your exception, I know, nearly all the moralists I know define themselves by the failures of others. I was quite dazed and confused by what you said. I don't know where to, well, sorry, no, then there was the chap with the beard. Can you, what was it? Just tell me what was the... Sorry, poverty's changed. Yeah. A lot of the people that the big issue works with in the UK are displaced people from somewhere else. So we work with Romanians, we work with Syrians, we work with other people, and we've had to do that because the government allows them in and doesn't provide them. So therefore we have, as we're a crime prevention program, we give them things so that we give them the opportunity of making money. That upsets a lot of people. We've had to move with the economy of poverty. And we're doing other things. We have an investment business called Big Issue Invest, and it invests in 500 social businesses and charities throughout the UK. We've had to go in and try and prevent things from happening. And that's the kind of, I mean, I could tell you more, but we've had to move on. The biggest thing that we never, ever address, and they didn't address in my life when I was a child, and that's the inheritance of poverty. So in fact, poverty's changed, but it hasn't changed that much. There's 9 million people caught in that web, 23% of the working age poor. Most of those have inherited poverty. Their parents were in poverty. They were the poverty of spirit, the poverty of opportunity, the poverty that my mother expressed to me when I was 5 and I went to my little Catholic school around the corner in Notting Hill. And she didn't say to me, go into school for the first time and prosper and learn. She said, go in there and don't feck about. The schoolroom, the school gate syndrome, where thousands and millions of parents don't know how to respond to education. They don't know. I went through 10 years of education from the age of 5 to 15. I come out as a non-reader. I learned to read and write in a boys' prison at the age of 16. I didn't know what this education was for. There was no preparation. There was no intellectual engagement or social engagement with my family saying, you know what, if you want Tony Bird to get on and do this, that, and the other. No. The worst thing we have is that because of government policy, we pollute our education system, because 34% of what money and time is spent by teachers, according to what I've been told by their union, is spent on the collateral damage created by poverty. I don't know if you will agree with that, but about a third of classrooms in many parts of the country are disturbed by the fact that the teachers have to become a social worker, a policeman, a best friend, and all sorts of things. They're not allowed to do the teaching as much as they could. I don't know if it's true, but I'm only telling you what I've been told. That, for instance, we don't train police officers to be social workers, but they have to be social workers because they have to pick up the damage created by poverty and fight crime. We don't train doctors. 50% of people who use the NHS are suffering from food poverty. These are the realities of poverty. When our colleague up here is talking about people selling their bodies on, online, I presume it's photographs and movies and stuff like that. That's what happens when you don't have an economy that recognizes the need to train and skill people away from poverty. What I'm doing in the house, if you want to know what I'm doing in the house, I'm trying to bring education and health and all these things together. So I am in the process of doing that. The big issue itself is working in areas that it's never worked before. Not working with homeless people, but working with preventing people falling into homelessness. We've had to move. We know we employ Romanians, we employ Syrians, we employ translators and all sorts of things because we know that is the way that poverty is presenting itself. But what we are, we're just in some senses an imaginative response to a crisis that's continuous. And until we get a government that addresses the inheritance of poverty, then we will continue to have 90% of our prisons full of people who didn't do well at school and who inherited poverty. So those are the big issues that we're doing. I'm just a mere spokesperson for many of the things that are going on. But overall, if I was just a person who had a job and was bringing up children, I would be asking these big questions of why is it that politically the parties are only repeating what they've done badly. If we wanted to end the war that Britain went into when it went into Iraq, instead of having 3 million people march through the streets of West London, of the center of London, somebody said to me, what did you do when you saw these 3 million people? I said, well, I didn't do what I wanted to do. And they said, what did you want to do? I said, I wanted to stand on Hungerford Bridge and pull out a machine gun and shoot as many of them as possible. This was the BBC again. They didn't run that. They said, why? I said, because they're all dreamers. The next demonstration will be 10,000 people. It was 50,000. It was wasting the energy. Oh, let's rise up. And you rise up and then you forget about it. Until we start thinking and challenging politics and joining the political parties, we're not going anywhere. We really are not going anywhere. And that is why I'm in Parliament, and that's why I shall probably die in Parliament. Well, you're not allowed to die in Parliament because what they do is an ambulance comes and takes you across the road to the hospital and you die there. So no one's allowed to die in Parliament. But the point is that until we change the way that we think, we're absolutely screwed. We live in a capitalism that is addictive. It's completely addictive. I walk through the streets of Norwich and I'm always bumping into people. If I see somebody walking on their phone, I walk in their way. Oh! Say, fucking watch out, will you? The disease of need, disease of addiction, that's what's going to kill us. And it is killing us. It's killing the minds of our children. And you've got all these people going around saying, why don't we just ban the phone in schools? And I say, great. And I support that. I support that in the House. But until we try and find out why is it that we're lost in a miasma of materialism and consumerism, unless the University of Oxford is challenging that rather than play around with pretending that it's an esoteric body, it's not. It's run by Philistines, and every other body in the world, all these Yales, and they're all doing the same thing. Anyway, I'm sure I haven't answered many of your questions, but I'm just going to carry on. Thank you.